Philippine Cinema 1912. Philippine Cinema 1984. Philippine cinema is over 70 years old. In more than 7 decades, it has produced well over 5,000 films. Fantasy, comedy, action, romance,
Labis ng kakaluluan mo. Gusto mo ipahalikin pa kita muna sa lupa para maipakilala ko sina pantay-pantay ang bawat nilikha.
drama,
Ngayong masakit na mga buto, maibig mo na lumabas sa aking kapangyarihan. Suwain! Tingnan ko lamang po hanggang saan ang tulis ng sungay mo! Inahin, nagkakamali kayo. Kailanman na hindi ko tinangka maghigandi sa inyo. Sinungaling!
Ah, ganon. Pues narito ang iyong premyo.
Ganon ha? Pinagbibigyan lang kita subalit.
musical,
Pag-ibig ko'y iyo at akin lang ang pag-ibig mo. Pag-isahin natin totoo ang puso mo, puso ko.
Philippine cinema has produced an enormous variety of films. This is the story of Philippine cinema. The story of its pioneers, its producers, its directors, its actors, and its technicians. This is the story of the studios, the star system, the themes and genre of Philippine movies. This is the story of the men who have shaped Philippine cinema and the movies that have become our national heritage.
Bugyo! At ang mga tuto! Walang laban yan! Titirahin na!
In 1897, moving pictures were presented for the first time in Manila. Photography studios were converted into movie houses for the screening of both local and foreign shorts. Movie-going proved to be a popular habit, and as movies increased in length, so too movie theaters sprouted all over the city. However, it wasn't until 1912 that the first full-length movies were produced locally. 2 foreigners vied for the honor of producing the first Filipino photoplay. H. Brown, owner of Gaiety Theater, hired playwright Edward Gross to direct a 1-hour film based on a stage play, La Vida de Jose Rizal. Not to be outdone, Albert Yearsley, owner of Majestic Theater, directed Severino Reyes's Gran Compañía de Zarzuela in El Fusilamiento de Jose Rizal, based on Austin Craig's biography of the national hero. Both films were premiered on the same day, August 23, 1912. Despite both productions' poor quality, Filipinos were enthralled to see on screen historic sites and Filipino performers. Encouraged by the tumultuous reception, the two Americans continued to make more movies. Edward Gross filmed his stage hit Noli Me Tangere. Albert Yearsley, Walang Sugat. Acknowledging the public's acceptance of the first Filipino photoplays, other filmmakers began to make movies. But after the initial successes, the novelty died down, and the technically proficient foreign pictures drew the audiences away from the poorly lighted local productions. Thus ended the first phase of Filipino movie making. It wasn't until 1919 that Filipino movie making was revived. Jose Nepomuceno, owner of a large photo studio in the heart of the city, bought Yearsley's and Gross's film equipment and set up his own company, Malayan Movies. His first film, based on a popular zarzuela by Hermogenes Ilagan, was Dalagang Bukid. One of the great figures of the local stage, Atang de la Rama, appeared as the leading lady.
Yun isang babae, isang dalaga na taga-bukid. Ngayon, nagtitinda siya ng bulaklak sa kabaret. Noong araw, yung mga nightclub ngayon kung tabaging kabaret. No? Ngayon, nung siya nagtitinda ron, merong nagkagusto sa kanya isang matandang kwan. Yung kung tinatawag nilang yung mga matatandang mayayaman, nagpupunta doon sa mga nightclub, Pero meron na siyang permanenteng nobyo, yung kapwa bata niya. Nung siya ay nililigaban nga ng matanda, yung matanda naman sa kanyang mga magulang nanunuyo. Alam mo na yung matatanda nung unang panahon sa magulang nanunuyo kung lumiligo sa dalaga, lalo ng kamukha nga ng matanda. Hanggang sa ginawa akong reyna ng kagandahan doon sa kabaret. Pagkatapos noon, ang ginawa ko naman, kung meron akong kagustuhan, nagtanan ako. Kasama ko yung aking nobyo. Ngayon, siyempre, nagsisi matanda. Ganon ang sarsuela.
For every screening of Dalagang Bukid, Atang had to stand by the screen and sing the zarzuela's popular songs.
Meron naman tinatawag na kuple, kamukha nung nasama doon sa Dalagang Bukid na nabasag ang banga. Ang ibig sabihin nun, nagkukwento siya doon sa kabaret na mayroong isang dalagang nilapitan ng nobyo, nadulas, nabasag ang banga. Kaya ang kanta niya doon ano ang nangyari? Nabasag ang banga, pagkat ang lalaki ay napadupilas, kaya't ang babae naro't umiiyak, at ang sinasabi siya'y napahamak.
Malayan Movies became the country's leading producer of silent films. Don Jose Nepomuceno directed other successful movies, La Venganza de Don Silvestre, Sampaguita, and the second movie adaptation of Jose Rizal's classic novel, Noli Me Tangere. The Nepomuceno residence near Malacanang was transformed into a studio. Don Jose shot his films there. He developed the negatives in the laboratory situated in the ground floor. His wife, Isabel, sewed the costumes for the actors. Filipino movie making then was a family enterprise. Filipinos began to be attracted to the art of silent motion pictures. They swelled the ranks of film directors. The more prominent ones were Julian Manansala, Vicente Salumbides, Carlos Vander Tolosa, and the Silos brothers, Cesar, Octavio, Augusto, and Manuel.
Sa biro-biro namin magkapatid, sa 60mm, nag-ano kami, parang laruan lang, just for fun. Ginawa namin yung Tres Sanganos, silent line. Tinapos namin yun, little by little. There's yung film, yung mismong roll of film, pinadala sa white for processing. Tapos about so many days, bumabalik dito. Tapos bibili na naman ng film. It was quite costly, pero sinuloy hanggang natapos namin.
Only a handful of silent movies were produced in the 20s, not enough to constitute an industry. Still, Filipinos were thrilled by the first kiss in Filipino movies, Dimples Cooper and Luis Tuason in Ang Tatlong Hambog. Silent movie fare ranged from soggy melodramas to religious conversions. In Who Killed General Luna, A saccharine romance unfolds amidst an investigation into the patriot's death. In Mystery of the Convent, Manuel Silus's first big movie, a young girl is made to choose between her parents.
A couple who have been living very happily in the city. And then the husband lost his job, so they had to go to the province. In the province, they were living quite fine enough. Then a friend from Manila came to visit them. The girl fell in love with the man. Then later, the father, the husband, caught them in the act. So they decided to separate. And then she prepared to go with the man in Manila. He was a rich man. Then later, when the time came for the little child to choose whom to go with the mother or with the father. The mother was telling her, you can have plenty of toys in Manila and so forth. The father said, I don't have anything to offer you but my love. That's all. And this house, which is our own. Finally, the little girl prepared to be with the father.
The early 30s, the time of the American Commonwealth. Sound films captivated audiences, but Filipino producers were slow in adopting the new technology. In 1930, Carlos Vander Tolosa's Collegian Love etched a soundtrack on phonograph records and tried to synchronize them with the action on the big screen. It was the first step towards producing a local sound film. In 1932, George Musser started directing the first Tagalog talkie, Ang Aswang, using optical sound. He turned his house into a studio. Every weekend for a year, he shot scenes for the movie. The house still stands in Pandacan. His soundman, William Smith, an American mestizo from Isabela, fondly reminisces on the shooting.
This is the set of the Manila Talkathon. This is where we make the interior shots of Aswang. That was 51 years ago. The first sound in the Philippine island. Took 1 year in the making. Everybody worked on part-time and on Sundays and holidays. Here is where the set was made, wherever the interior was required. We were shooting also in Pasig River for the ship. That's why part of the picture was aboard the ship. And then some shots in Tamuros. This is the first sound booth in the Philippine Islands. I had this space constructed for the shooting. This is the glass window where I can see the shooting. And here's my mixer was put here, and the recorder, optical recorder here, and the battery here. In fact, this is still the original wood that I had ordered to be made. This is the laboratory where we process the film. This they had a chemical where motion picture chemicals put into wooden tanks, big large wooden tanks, and then they process it there for developing, and then acid stop, and then hypo, so on, then it can be taken out. Of course, this is all done in total darkness. This is all done in total darkness. Then after the film is processed, it's brought out into a drying rack with a big wheel-like, and that's when the film is wound on and then spun and to dry. Then it's ready for printing. Now I'll show you where the makeup is in the upstairs and where Mr. George Marshall used to live. This is a 150-year-old house, a beautiful house at that. This is where Mr. Marshall lived with his family in this room here, while the other places are used by the artists to produce the picture. This is the balcony of the house, quite large and airy. This is where the people make up the artists to be shot and before the shooting.
Ang Aswang finally bowed at the Lyric Theater. It had numerous technical problems. The sound wasn't properly synced. At the same time, two Americans, Stuart Eddie Tate and George Harris, envisioned a mini Hollywood in the Philippines. With the help of Hollywood director Frank Capra, They brought in technicians from the United States to improve on sound technology. Their first efforts were to record soundtracks for the partially completed films of Jose Nepomuceno, Punyal na Ginto, Bakata at Paraluman, Ang Kuba. Seeing the enthusiastic response for Tagalog talkies, Tate and Harris embarked on a program of mass production. They set up their own studio just outside Manila and called it fittingly enough, Philippine Films. It was a studio in the Hollywood tradition. Shooting was done on a sound stage. There were separate departments for each aspect of filmmaking, run not by family members but by qualified personnel. George Harris was the first production manager.
Ang sabi ko, mabait, very strict lang sa punctuality ng mga artista sa pagdating sa studio. Kung sinabi niya ganyan oras, dapat nandun ka. Nasa board yan. Pagdating mo dyan, nakalagay ang bus. The bus will leave the studio ganyan oras. Palagay mo 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Be on time. Be here before the departure. Ayun, kailangan mo dyan ka 10 minutes or quarter to sa time ng departure ng bus. Pag oras talaga niyan, so, nakalagay 7 o'clock, the bus leaves at the studio at 7 o'clock. Kahit na mga star ka o ano ka, walang hinihintayan.
Filipino technicians learned quickly from the Americans and in a matter of months equaled their expertise.
Now, another scene na ginawa ko, yung the escapade, the prisoner's escape. Ngayon, I had to have different scenes. Nag-close up na lahat. Ngayon, ang ginawa ko, nandito meron akong, yung non-silk, ang tinatawag namin, yung turntable, there's C. Tatlo yun. Yun, dinedissolve ko ang music. We took the film, one straight shot. Itong shot dito, nalagyan ko music. Tapos pupunta ko dito, papaling namin ng ganyan. Yung paling na yun will not be used in the film. Instead, I put a neutral insert for it while the music still goes on. I was able to put the music complete.
Isang Amerikano yun, si Mr. Morse. Nung tinest niya ako, hindi naman kilala siguro ang timbre ng boses ko. Yung lang ako nakita niya. Tinest ako pagkatapos, pumunta kay Mr. Harris. Sabi niya kay Mr. Harris, hindi raw pwede ako sa talkies. Sabi, bakit? Hindi ang boses niya parang nagka-crack. Narinig niya ni Billy Smith. Sabi, Mr. Harris, I'll try. Sabi, siya raw ang gagawa ang boses ko, siyang gagawa. Sabi, all right, Billy, you do it. Ginawa ni Bill. Okay naman, kilala na ako ni Billy. Ayun, sabi niya, okay naman niya. Mr. Harris, tinawag niya si Mr. Harris, you come over to the studio and hear the voice of Mary. Ayun, naman. Di sabi niya, wala na siguro, sinabi lang ni Mr. Harris, okay pala ang boses ni Mary. So then, I was casted in Inagpis ng Magulang. That's my first talking picture.
Pagkat yung araw, ang sound, hindi sensitive ang mic. Kinakailangan, you have to speak louder and louder. Kaya nga there was going a little an occurrence in a scene in Magulang, Maynila. The prisoners were planning to escape. And then, they had to whisper, pass the word from one to another. Then, niya, sa puso, where is that? Sa putol na sapa, tayo magtakpo. That is the word. Then, since it was a whisper, and the mag-record, I can be Smith, louder. Sa putol na sapa, tayo magtakpo. Then louder. Sa putol na sapa, tayo magtakpo. My God! You know what happened? It was not a whisper anymore. When the picture appeared, the people were laughing. Because the action was to put on top of them, but he was shouting. So the people, it became quite a comedy.
The successful launching of Philippine films sparked the studio boom of the 30s. In less than 5 years, the movie business developed into an industry and was producing as many as 50 films a year. In 1935, with capital coming from a group of stockholders, Jose Nepomuceno reorganized his family-run Malayan movies into Parlaton Hispano-Filipino. In 1937, Luis Nolasco and Pedro Vera established Sampaguita Pictures.
Ako ay nagtatrabaho como editor ng Literales Movie Magazine. Ang publisher niyan si Congressman Pedro Vera. Isang araw, kumakain kami sa Tom's Dixie Kitchen, sinabi ko sa kanya, interesado ka ba sa industriya ng pelikula, ng Tagalog? Sabi niya sa akin, wala akong naintindihan dyan. Yan mo, ako naman mamahala, ako magpapatagbo. Ikaw lang humanap ng kapital. Isipin natin, kanya. At ang ginawa ko, inimbita ko siya, inihaya ko siyang panurin yung pelikulang katapos ko lang gawin, no? Yung Milagro ng Nazareno sa Quiapo. At tingnan niya yung pelikula, nagustuhan niya. Sabi niya, I like it. Let's talk tomorrow in the office. Yun ang nangyari. Sa next day, pumunta kami sa opisina niya, nag-usap kami. Tinanong niya sa akin, ano bang kapital kailangan mo para may tayo natin itong kumpanyang ito? Kako siguro 100 to 150,000 will be enough, no? Porque kung sabi mo sa inyo, ang mga pelikula yung araw, makakakuha ng pelikula ng 25 to 30,000 pesos. Ngayon, sabi niya, bueno, gawin natin. Ayan, inisip mo namin. Kinuha namin yung mga kaibigan namin, gaya ni Jose Sulueta, Dr. Gabino, Paco Delgado, ako, si Judge Vera, Pedro Vera, at mga 10 kami, mga incorporators. At primero, ang unang capitalization namin, 100,000 pesos, cash. At yan na, nag-encargo na ako ng aparato at nakanap na ako ng location para sa studio. Sinama ko ang sound engineer ko, si Billy Smith. Nabi ko, samahan mo ko, ikaw ang technical man sa sound. Tingnan mo kung saan tayo makatuloy ng studio na hindi masyadong may storbo sa mga ingay, no? Porque ayaw naman kami lumayo masyado sa syudad, no? Gusto namin sa loob ng syudad. Kaya nga, sa paglalakad-lakad namin, nakita namin nga yung lugar diyan sa Gilmore, sa dulo ng Gilmore, sa San Juan. Nakita niya ng lupa, mababa. Kanya, ito mabuti. Ito mabuti para sa studio, sound studio. Ayan, binili namin kay Paco Delgado yung lupang yun na 1.5 hectares, mga 16,000 square meter. At itayo namin dyan ang 2 studio.
In 1939, LVN was incorporated by a group of stockholders led by Doña Narcisa Viuda de Leon.
Ang LBN ay samahan ng 3 magkakaibigan. Si Don Eleuterio Naboa, si Doña Carmen Billonco, at si Doña Narcisa de Leon. Ang pangalang LBN, kinuha sa mga umpisa ng mga pangalan nila. De Leon, Billonco, Naboa, LBN. Unang-unang pelikulang ginawa nila ay Giliw Ko. Pero wala pa silang studio. Ang studio namin, tatandaan ko noon, sa ilalim ng mga punong mangga, ilalim ng mga punong bayabas, sa ilalim ng mga kawayan, doon kami nagsushooting. Ang mga interior scenes namin, ginagawa namin kung gabi, na yung hindi makikita ng tao kung anong background namin at madilim. Sa pangalawang pelikula, nagkaroon na ng studio ang LVN. Gumawa sila ng barn, parang gaya ng sa Hollywood na sound stage. Pero hindi naman masyadong maliit, hindi naman masyadong malaki.
Other movie outfits were instituted in the late 30s. Exotic Films, Cervantina Filipina, Excelsior Pictures, to name a few.
Yung studio sa Excelsior, isa sa magaling na studio porque soundproof, double wall. Maski maingay sa labas, hindi kami na-estorbo. Sige tuloy ang shooting namin. Tsaka ako, gustong-gusto ko talaga gumawa ng pelikula, may studio. Porque control ninyo lahat eh. Control nyo yung sound, control nyo yung ilaw. Hindi kayo na gaya niyo, kumisan eh, Regarding sa location, kung minsan kung walang araw o kundi lumulubog ng araw, sira ang photography. Lahat yung wasted, no? Tatapon namin yun. Sa studio, control na control namin. Tsaka meron kaming lahat ng light na kailangan namin, all kinds of light, for effect, for everything. Ang araw, nagawa namin gabi. Ang gabi, nagawa namin araw.
Witness to the studio boom was Luis Nolasco. In 1940, he had the distinction of being the production manager of 3 major studios, Sampaguita, Excelsior, and Philippine Films.
Sa Sampaguita Pictures, ako ay production manager. Sa Excelsior at sa Philippine Film, nag-umpisa rin ako ng production manager. Porque kasama ko hasta si General Romulo diyan sa mga kumpanya yan, porque siya ang chairman ng executive committee ng Philippine Film sa Excelsior. Ang manager yun sa Philippine Film si Amado Raneta. At ang manager sa Excelsior Film, Don Ramon Araneta, kapatid ni Amading Araneta. Ngayon, yung pagkatapos ng 2 taon, ako na naging manager pagka namatay si Don Ramon Araneta sa Port Santiago.
Peacetime, the age of blushing innocence before the devastating Holocaust, when heroes were distinct from villains, as black is to white. It was a time when good always triumphed over evil, and movies ended on a happy note. Children were forsaken by their parents, but were soon adopted by kindred souls. Lovers were temporarily separated by social conventions, but they found themselves in each other's arms by the movie's end. It was a time when socially minded directors produced movies with a nationalistic accent. In Walang Sugat, a Katipunero marries the girl he loves by pretending to be dying. But it was also a time when Hollywood began to exert a strong influence. Darmo von Fraser Acosta swung from tree to tree like Tarzan in Pugad ng Agila. In imitation of the Hollywood private eye, Tito Arevalo seeks out a criminal intent on sowing anarchy in the country. In Tigre, a cub reporter fights a gang of counterfeiters whose initials spell the title of the movie. In Anggagamba, Carlos Padilla has a brush with the underworld. But the most popular genre was the musical.
At kung ikaw ay wala, ang ligaya ko'y mamamatay. Ganda mo giliw, ang siyang pangarap. Ang bawat hirap na nakakamtan ay napawing lahat. Ito ay tunay, umutiyang paraluhan. Saksi ang langit, nasumpa ko ikaw. Ikaw ang buhay, ikaw ang alaman. Ang siyang handungan ng aking pag-ibig at pagmamahal. I'm so in love with you, darling, what can I do?
It set romance and intrigue to music.
I found you're on my mind.
The conflict between the rich and the poor, between provincial mores and city customs, between foreign fashions and folk traditions.
My heart's a flame burning with love sincere.
Kapwa tao. Ang ibig mo ba sabihin, ipangangaralan mo isang katulad kung may mata sa pinag-aralan? Nagkakamali ka. May sa dulo ng daliri ng mga pako, hindi ka abot sa pinag-aralan ko.
In Pakiusap, a young girl is forced to marry an aging landlord so that his father, a hapless tenant fighting for his rights, might be released from prison. The landlord's son seeks to redress the wrong inflicted by his father.
Buksan mo ang bintana, alawin mo't kahabagan, ang sa'yo'y nagmamahal. Kung sa kalimat salat, ayamat pangarap, may isang sumpang wagas, ang aking paglinang, pakiusap ko sa'yo. Awan mo ako, kahit mamatay, pag-ibig ko'y minsan lang.
Ang pakiusap sinulat ko ito para sa Excelsior Pictures. At nag-agawan pa nga ang mga direktor. Gusto ni Tolosa, gusto ni Octavio. Pero sinabi ko Tolosa, pabigyan naman natin pagkataon si Octavio. Kaya siya nag-direct ng pakiusap. Ito naman ang mga location namin ito, mga layo. Meron sa Bulacan, meron sa Little Baguio. At yung araw talaga maraming location namin porque ito meron kami yung ng mga eksena nasa bangka sila na yung SSS Trio, kumakanta roon, saka Charing Moreno. Pero ang ginagamit na boses namin para kay Charing Moreno, si Feli Vallejo. Yun, meron na kaming playback. Ang mga sound, kinukuha namin sa sound studio, complete. At pagkatapos sa shooting, actual shooting, ginagamit namin playback. Ang ginagawa ng mga artista, sunod na lang.
In Zamboanga, pearl diver Fernando Po combs the reefs for a fortune in pearls in order to win the hand of his betrothed, Rosa del Rosario. The film, retitled South Seas for foreign release, was premiered simultaneously in New York and Manila. By the end of the 30s, Filipino technicians were using the playback system.
That was not my real voice. It was dubbed, and the lady who sang for me is Reynaria Hernandez. She is a graduate of the UP Conservatory of Music, and I can speak very highly of her because she really took time out to study my speaking voice. So that when I sing from talking, then I go on to singing, you cannot tell the difference. Because she really studied she went down to the level of my voice, and she studied inflection and the pronunciation, so that most people thought that it was really me singing, but it wasn't.
The decade's most accomplished director was Carlos van der Tolosa. His penchant for lavish settings, his emphasis on detail, coupled with a clear-cut cinematic style, created many of the memorable musicals before the war. He often directed the initial presentations of the major studios. In 1935, his direction of Parlaton's first film, Diwata ng Karagatan, elicited favorable reactions in Europe. In 1937, he directed Sampaguita's first movie, Bituing Marikit. And in 1939, LVN's first picture, Giliw Ko.
I think he is a consummate director, a director's director really, because he's really artista ba, you know, and he really works hard. He studies your personality, he studies all the movements and everything, you know, before he shoots a scene. And what came out of Giliw Ko was months of painstaking study of, according to him, of me. He brought out the best in me, that which I didn't know that I had. He was really, to me, he's really number one.
Isa po siya sa isang magaling na direktor, lalo-lalo na sa musical. Porque kung siya ay naging singer sa stage, no? Nakakindi siya ng music. At saka mabuti siya sa mga camera angle. Isa siya sa mas magaling sa camera angle.
That fellow was some kind of a genius. To think that he had no training, no schooling about motion pictures, so yet he had the knack for timing, for beautiful music, for beautiful angles. That fellow was quite something. He was truly the first movie director I had the good luck to work with, and his way of working influenced me a lot.
Carlos van der Tolosa closely collaborated with composer Miguel Velarde and scenarist Luis Nolasco. Nicknamed Nol Tolvel, the trio burned the midnight oil to produce the fabulous musicals of the 30s.
Yes, naging successful naman na aming collaboration, tatlo kami. Porque natira kami sa bahay. Si Tolosa at si Velarde natitira sa akin. Kaya buong aming cooperation. Maski gabi, hating gabi, nag-uusap kami, nakikipagtalo kami, paano namin gagawin itong sequence, anong mabuti, sino, ganon, kung dapat gitara lamang, kung orkestra, kung rondalya. Ayan, pinag-usapan namin. Kaya, awa ng Diyos naman, lumabas na mabuti ang mga cooperation namin tatlo.
Tolosa's contemporaries were an understandably homogeneous bunch. Manuel Silos came out with musicals just as exciting as Tolosa's. Tor Villano was a director with an unsentimental view of life.
He was, I thought, the best director for touching the human chord, really very real. He loved to touch on the reality of situations. He did not like to garnish, he did not like to fantasize. He came down to the mud and stayed there and only brought out the nobility of the people. And from him, probably I also was affected by that style, and I like to do the same, to be able to draw from the dire and the murky and the sad, some ennobling thoughts, and this is what I've always tried to do in some of my movies.
Agapito Conchu always had a few tricks up his sleeve.
Mr. Conchu was a director who moved in because he also came from a theatrical family, and all I recall from him is that since we didn't have special effects at the time, when a judge was being shot at by a culprit that he had sentenced to life imprisonment, something like that, took a shot at him, we had no special effect, but Conchu, being an NBI man, was a sharpshooter. And during the actual take, he shot at the judge, and the judge didn't know about it until that entire seal busted in back of him, and the terror on his face, registered by the camera, is something that cannot be matched, I think, by any actor.
Enrique Herrera Davila, Guillermo Icasiano, Carmen Concha, Joaquin Pardo de Tavera, Don Danon, Lorenzo Perez de Tuels, Eduardo de Castro, Mar Esmeralda. A new generation of filmmakers who were to dominate the movie scene in the next 2 decades started their first films in the late 30s. Gerardo de Leon, Philippine cinema's national artist.
It was a very cooling, soothing effect to work with Jerry, because he's very soft-spoken. He's very cool in everything, in every way, and I think with his work with the camera, it's like the camera is his lover. You don't know what's going on, but he will just tell you calmly, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. And then before you know it, when you see the finished product, it was beautiful.
Manuel Conde, whose satiric comedies were some of LVN's top grossers.
Ang pangalawang pelikula ni Tolosa ay Hali. Assistant director na naman ako roon. Pero nung gumagawa kami, akong gumagawa ng kanyang script. Medyo natuto akong gumawa ng script. Namataan ako siguro ni Doña Sisang na si Manaling ang gumagawa ng script. Kung may itinatanong kay Tolosa, ang sigaw kagad ni Tolosa, Manaling, ano bang studio, ano bang bukas na shooting natin? Sino bang artista? Kaya sabi ni Doña Sisang, sino bang director dito? Si Manaling o ikaw? Kaya nang si Tolosa lumipat sa RDR Productions ni Araneta, ginawa ako ni Doña Sisang na director. Kunyari pa pinashoot sa akin isang eksena sapagkat wala pa raw si Tolosa ay maraming extra. Yung pala sinadya, alam na pala niya na hindi darating si Tolosa. Kung masira ito, kung masira, ulitin natin. Doon ako nag-umpisa na maging director. Sapagkat ayaw ko naman mag-director talaga nung primero Gusto ko artista.
Lamberto Avellana, whose first film, Sakay, was hailed by critics as an auspicious debut.
I had just completed directing a major play for the Ateneo on my graduation year. And obviously our guest of honor was so impressed with the play that I had just directed that he asked to be brought backstage to meet the director. That gentleman, our guest of honor, was then newspaper editor Carlos P. Romulo, who, as you know, is now the retired ambassador of the Philippines. And he asked me, would I like to direct Philippine movies? And honestly, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Filipino movie industry at the time. It seems there was, but I had never seen a Filipino movie. And he said, well, good, that's a good start. Let's start with you not knowing anything about it. And can you report tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock? I said, yeah. And that was it. At 8 o'clock the next day, I met the owner of the company, Philippine Films, and that was Mr. Amado Araneta, who had just acquired Philippine Films. I chose the theme Sakay, the rebel hero of the Philippine Revolution, Macario Sakay. And like I'm telling friends now, if I were to do that movie again, it would be a complete change altogether because I treated him as an out-and-out bandit, probably with a heart of gold, as they say, but he was a bandit. That's why the expression before was para kang si Sakay, meaning you are a raider, you are a murderer, you are a rapist, and you had long hair, because that's what he was, he had long hair. But as I look at our history, apart from the American history that we were given at that time, it turns out that Macario Sakay was one of the last holdouts with General of Batangas. It's Alejandrino, I think, the general, who did not surrender to the Americans the very, very last few days.
Ramon Estela, whose 2 films, Huling Habilin and Buena Vista, were considered among the best films of the 30s. Gregorio Fernandez, who directed highly successful romances. Movie stars, the beautiful people, trendsetters, fashion arbiters, the celluloid sirens and Sir Galahads, whose fabled lifestyles are scrutinized by countless millions. With the mass production of movies in the 30s, emerged the star system. Studios hurriedly discovered and promoted prospective candidates for moviedom's glamour circle. They were recruited from radio and from vaudeville, or they were simply onlookers in a movie set. Foremost star maker was Jose Nepomuceno.
Nanood lamang kung may shooting kasi doon na hindi naman malapit sa bahay, pero may kaibigan ko, sabi, manood tayo ng shooting. Sinamahan ko siya, nagsama kaming dalawa para manood lamang ng shooting. Alala ko pa ang pelikulang ginagawa ng Nepomuceno, Lilies of Benguet. Si Nati Fernandez pa, ang artista noon, ang star. Nanonood lang naman kami. Yung pala ko lang ng isa, nang sasayaw ng, parang hindi naman musical, porque musical rin when it comes to that, no? Pero kulang pala sila ng isang extra para sumayaw ng Karinyosa. Wala naman ako, tinawag ako ngayon ni Mr. Nepomuceno. Sabi, alika nga, Miss Tisha. Lumapit naman ako, bakit to? Sabi niya ganyan. Marunong ko ba sumayaw ng Karinyosa? Sabi ko, marunong naman eh, sinasayaw namin yan sa kolehiyo. Gusto mo bang lumabas sa pelikula? Sabi ko, makikita mo ka ako sa pelikula. Sabi, oo, labas ka nga eh. O sabi ko, sige na. O, pero sabi ko, wala akong damit. Nakita ko lahat yung mga tao doon, yung mga extra nakabalintawak. Sabi, pahiraman ka namin. Ayun, binahiram ako. Nagsayaw ako ng Karinyosa.
They saw my picture in the magazine that was brought there by a certain actress, Alma Bella, one of the most prominent actresses at that time, who became my friend, brought my picture there, and then they called for me. When they saw me, okay, we agreed on things, and I appeared as the leading man of a picture with Jose Nepomuceno, the owner of the Malayan movies, Santon Diablo.
Movie stars were looked upon as studio investments. They were signed to long-term contracts with strict moral clauses. Discipline was rigidly enforced.
Una-una, ang kontrato namin exclusive. Ang mga artist namin exclusive. Meron kaming exclusive contract for them. Minsan for 2 years, for 5 years, ganon. Porque ginagawa ko yung para ako nag-build up ng isang star, makukuha ko ang return. Kaya ginagawa ko ang exclusive contract. At saka sa kontrato ko, meron akong mga conditions diyan, ang mga moral nila, no? Behavior. Kung isang makaroon ng isang skandalo, that's enough to cancel the contract, no? At ang disiplina, talagang sinabi ko, pag sinabi kong alas 8, alas 7 medyo shooting, kailangan sumipit kayo ron.
To satisfy the public's seemingly insatiable demand for romance, movie studios paired movie stars and love teams that were to last the length of their careers. Rudy Concepcion and Rosario Moreno. Mila del Sol and Fernando Po. Corazon Noble and Angel Esmeralda, Rogelio de la Rosa and Carmen Rosales, Eli Ramos and Norma Blancaflor. The gods and goddesses of the silver screen, the idols worshipped by shrieking fans. The most popular were Leopoldo Salcedo, nicknamed the Great Profile, Rosa del Rosario, whose celebrated acting abilities were amply demonstrated in many films, Elsa Oria, the country's singing sweetheart, Jose Padilla Jr., Lucita Goyena, Yolanda Marquez, Alma Bella, Feli Vallejo, Rosita Rivera, Amparo Caragdag, Purita Santa Maria, Lilian Velez, Arsenia Francisco, Ernesto Laguardia, Serafin Garcia, Luningning, Esther Magalona, Rodolfo Ruiz, Fernando Royo, Flor de Lis.
Ang buhay ng artista ay laging masaya kahit saan napapantok sa palakpakan. Ito ang ating ngayon na upang matulad. Malang nakakakita, dahil ay mapagulat at tayo'y mapasukat. Na upang magala, talagang magbinasa, saryang ng pahinga. Ito ang ating ngayon, ating matasukan. Ang matindakot ng mga kasita, tayo'y mapagulat. At tayo'y magpasikap magala, talagang magbinasa yun ang pahinga.
December 8, 1941. Japanese planes bombarded Intramuros. The Philippines was unceremoniously pushed into World War II. Bataan and Corregidor fell the following year. Manila was declared an open city, but for many it was business as usual.
Naku, mahirap nung panahon ng hapon. Unang-una, wala kang resources, wala kang negatibo, wala kang sound, wala kang positive stock para i-kopya mo ang pelikula mo. Saan ka kukuha? Linot ang pelikula Philippines ng mga tao noong araw. Kaya ako, nang pinagawa sa akin, yung pinatatapos sa akin yung Prinsipe Tinyoso, sapagkat yung Prinsipe Tinyoso, ginawa ko, nakanahati ko lang, nagkagera na. Sa Tondo ako namimili ng negative stock sa mga nakapag-loot doon, mga kutsero. Sa awa ng Diyos, nayari naman. Pero mahirap kang gumawa ng pelikula ng mga petsang yun. Sapagkat ipinipilit ng Hapon na bigyan ng propaganda yung pelikula. Kamukha ng ginawa nila sa mga dyaryo, sa radyo. Gusto nila, pati pelikulang gawa ng Pilipino, may Japanese propaganda. Ay anong gagawin ng Japanese propaganda noong panahon ni Don Juan Tinyoso? Wala pang Japan noong araw. Kaya hirap na hirap ako. Pero sa awa ng Diyos, natapos ko rin ang pelikula. Binigyan din akong permission nila, natapusin ko yung Don Juan Tinyoso.
When raw stock finally disappeared from the stockroom, movie folks shifted to the stage and movie houses were converted into theaters.
During that time, I was at the Avenue Theater because I started putting on stage presentations at the Avenue with the Philippine Artists League, PAL. It was called PAL. And we had a 2-hour-and-a-half show every day, 3 times a day. The first hour was for musical review and songs and dances and acrobatics and circus type of songs and so on. And then it would die out. Finish that part was 1 hour. Then the house lights would dim down, and then we'd have a full overture written specially for the play that would be coming up. The new theme, in other words. If it was Maalala Mo Kaya, it was a whole symphonic rendition with 60 members in the band. 60 to play. Mike Velarde was my musical director. With a fully composed theme of, let's say, Maalala Mo Kaya, or Ay Kalisut, whatever it is. And then a play, 3-act play, written by quite a battery of writers, and which actors learned for 1 week and a half, learning the lines, and then opening up to censorship with the Japanese on the day of opening in the morning. And if approved, we got a piece of paper saying, yes, we may put on the show. If it was not approved because there was in any way a slur on the government that they led here, we were asked to change. We would change the presentation. For the next 2 days, we'd have a new one altogether. Personally, I feel that this was the best flowering of Philippine theater.
The productions were closely supervised by the Japanese.
There was one occurrence that happened with me na yung lumalabas ako sa Metropolitan. I have a playing xylophone. Popular ako sa mga Hapon. Hindi ng anchor. Eh wala na akong music. Basta naisip ko, Stars and Stripes Forever. Tinugtog ko sa mga Hapon yun. Ngayon sabi sa akin ni Sarah, yung director ko, Silos, do you know what you play? What? Stars and Stripes Forever. Pero Hapon yan. Ay, nilerpis ako. Yung pala, ang sinugtog ko, against them. Pero, hindi na yung pinalisan, mga Hapon. Palakpakan nila. Then, nothing happened.
Hollywood and Filipino reruns and new Japanese films were the movie staple of this critical period. In 1944, the Japanese set up a branch of their propaganda arm, Aiga Aikusa. Their first production was an anti-American film entitled The Dawn of Freedom.
I was asked to appear in a picture, almost forced to appear. I was coerced to appear. Yung Dawn of Freedom, I was almost threatened to appear under the Japanese company directed by Abe Yutaka. He was a very good director, pero siyempre, hapon yun, parang ayaw mo, di ba? Ayaw mo. Wala, kukulong ka sa Port Santiago, malalabas ka na.
Just before the end of the war, Jerry De Leon finished Tatlong Maria on city folk resettling in the province. It astutely steered clear from propaganda. The bombs again fell by the end of 1944. And by 1945, Manila was a city in ruins, reduced to rubble and scrap iron. The movie industry was one of the first to rise up from its ashes, recording on film the joys of liberation and the travails of post-war reconstruction. Thus ended a chapter in Philippine cinema and began another, captured on sound and color by the ubiquitous moving camera.